Let me ask you a question. If an attacker gained access to your Azure environment tomorrow, how confident are you that you would know about it? Not next week, not after a customer complaint, not even after a security audit. I mean, straight away, like tomorrow. Because one of the biggest misconceptions I see when speaking with customers is that moving to Azure automatically makes them secure. It doesn't. Azure gives you access to some incredibly powerful security capabilities, right? But simply having access to those capabilities doesn't mean they're being used effectively. It's a bit like buying the safest car on the market and deciding never to wear a seatbelt, right? The technology can help you, but your decisions matter. And that's why security architecture is so important. In the last episode, we designed our client's network architecture, right? We discussed connectivity and growth, segmentation and preparing for future expansion. Today, we're actually going to look at how consultants can approach Azure security. Not from that sort of perspective of fear and not from that perspective of sort of compliance like a checklist, but from the perspective of reducing risk while enabling the business to move forward confidently. We're going to explore zero trust, right? Security architecture, things like cyber resiliency and visibility, and monitoring and how modern consultants use AI especially to improve security decision making. Because the goal isn't to create a perfectly secure environment, right? The goal is to create an environment that remains resilient when things can go wrong. And eventually, something always goes wrong. When organizations first begin their cloud journey, they often ask a question like this, right? What security tool should we deploy? On the surface, that seems like a reasonable question, I suppose, but it's definitely the wrong question, right? A better question would be, what risks are we trying to actually reduce? But security isn't really about tools, right? Security is about risk management. You can deploy every security tool available and still have significant risk. At the same time, a well designed security strategy can dramatically reduce risk without introducing excessive complexity. The cloud adoption framework secure methodology emphasizes that security should span the entire cloud adoption journey rather than sort of being treated as a sort of separate project at the end. Microsoft also recommends integrating security across sort of your planning, your readiness, your governance and operations, and your modernization activities. This is one of the biggest mindset shifts I try to help customers make. Security is it's not a phase, right? Security design is a principle and it influences every decision we make. Before we jump into security controls, let's actually go back to our customer, right? So our client, as it's around 500 users, they're migrating away from an aging data center and they're expanding internationally, right? They have a relatively small IT team and they want a platform that scales securely as the business grows. Now imagine you're the security architect assigned to this project, right? What's the first thing you do? Most people immediately start thinking about firewalls, right? That's usually where the conversation goes. But after years of consulting, I've actually learned that security discussions should not start with technology. They should start with understanding what the business values the most. What information is actually sensitive, right? Which systems are also critical? And what would have the biggest business impact if it was compromised? What are organizations' biggest concerns, right? What think of regulatory obligations as well? Do they actually exist? What keeps leadership awake at night? Because if you don't understand what you're protecting, it's very difficult to design an effective protection methodology. One concept I spend a lot of time discussing with customers is cyber resilience, right? Notice I didn't say cyber security, I said cyber resilience. There's an important difference there, right? Traditional security often focuses on prevention. How do we stop attacks, right? How do we block those malicious activities? How do we actually prevent compromise? Those things remain important. But modern security measures, something else totally, right? Eventually somebody will click something they shouldn't. Eventually credentials are going to get exposed. And eventually a system may become compromised. Just facts. Microsoft Zero Trust Guidance promotes an assume breach mindset, right? Where organizations design security controls with expectation that attacks will occur and focus on limiting impact and improving detection capabilities. And this is where resilience comes in. The question becomes, can we detect threats quickly, right? Can we contain them? Can we minimize business disruption? And can we recover efficiently? For our client, resilience is just as important as prevention because the real measure of a security strategy isn't whether incidents happen, it's how effectively you actually respond when they do. By now, you've probably heard the phrase zero trust, right? It's appeared in conferences, vendor presentations, blogs and white papers, and security briefings for years. But sometimes I think the concept gets overcomplicated. At its core, zero trust is surprisingly simple, right? Don't automatically trust, verify. Microsoft describes zero trust using three key principles: verify explicitly, use least privilege access, and assume breach. When I explain zero trust to customers, I often use a real world analogy, right? Imagine an office building. Would you let someone just walk into every room simply because they enter through the front door? Probably not. You'd verify who they are, right? You'd control which areas they can access. You'd also monitor unusual activity. And you'd investigate suspicious behaviour. That's essentially what we're trying to achieve in Azure. Zero trust is not like one technology. It's a way of thinking, but that way of thinking should influence every architecture decision we make. If you cast your mind back to episode 3, we actually talked about extensively about identity, right? And there was a reason we spent so much time there. Identity remains one of the most important security controls in any Azure environment. If identity fails, many of security controls become less effective. That doesn't mean identity solves every problem, but it does mean identity deserves enormous attention. Microsoft Security Guidance highlights identity strengthening, right? Least privilege access and just-in-time administration as foundational components of security modernization. For our client, our security journey is going to start with ensuring users have the right access, administrative privileges are controlled, and sensitive access paths are protected. Because attackers often target identities before they actually target the infrastructure. And a good security architect recognizes that reality. Another mistake I see regularly is customers investing heavily in protection while investing very little in visibility. Imagine trying to defend a building with no cameras, no alarms, right? No monitoring, no actual way of knowing whether anything unusual has actually happened. That's effectively what some organizations do in cloud environments, right? The stronger your visibility, the faster you can identify risk. This is why modern Azure security strategies emphasize monitoring, telemetry, alerting, and security postures. Microsoft highlights the importance of continuous compliance scanning, threat detection, telemetry collection, and posture tracking through capabilities such as Microsoft Defender for Cloud. One thing I often tell customers is this: you can't protect what you can't see. Visibility creates awareness. Awareness enables action, and action reduces risk. One of the biggest myths in technology is that security slows down innovation. I hear this all the time. The security team won't let us do this. The security controls are slowing us down. The approval process is creating bottlenecks. When security is badly implemented, those frustrations are often valid. But well-designed security should enable business growth, not prevent it. For our client in this scenario, security isn't about creating obstacles. It's about creating confidence. Confidence to expand internationally. Confidence to onboard new applications. Confidence to migrate workloads and to innovate. The best security programs don't say no all the time. They actually help organizations move safely. That's a different mindset, right? And it's one that modern consultants need to embrace. Despite all the new technologies and modern security frameworks, some foundational principles remain incredibly relevant. One of those is the CIA Triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework continues to reference the CIA principles as a core model for protecting information and ensuring comprehensive security planning. When reviewing our client's environment, I want to think about all three, right? How do we actually protect sensitive data? How do we actually ensure data remains trustworthy and unchanged? And how do we ensure systems remain available when the business needs them? Many organizations focus heavily on confidentiality, but availability is equally important. An application that is secure but unavailable is still a business problem. Security architecture should consider all three dimensions together. One of the major advantages of cloud adoption is the opportunity to build security into the platform from the beginning, right? Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework recommends integrating security considerations into landing zones, your governance decisions, your automation strategies, and adoption planning, rather than trying to retrofit security later. This is why landing zones were so important early in this series, right? The landing zone isn't just about structure. It's about creating a foundation where security becomes easier. Governance becomes easier, right? Same with compliance. You need to make it easy, right? Operations become easier. Security should not feel bolted on, right? It should feel built in. And that's one of the hallmarks of a mature cloud architecture. If you're enjoying the Azure Consultant Playbook series, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a like. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question. When you think about cloud security, what concerns you the most? Is it your identity? Is it your data protection? Maybe ransomware or compliance, or even operational complexity? Let me know in the comments below because security challenges often reveal some of the most valuable lessons in cloud architecture. Now, let's move into the consultant Copilot corner. Security is one of those areas where AI can provide enormous value to consultants. Not because AI replaces security architects, but because modern environments generate huge volumes of information, right? Like recommendations and alerts, a lot of security findings that they show compliance gaps, even incident data and configuration risks. The challenge here isn't generating the information. The challenge is actually making sense of it, right? Imagine we've just completed a security assessment for our client, right? We have security recommendations from multiple sources. We have posture reports, and we have some architectural findings. We even have risk assessments. A consultant could use Microsoft Copilot to summarize findings, right? Identify common themes, prioritize those recommendations, and create structured remediation plans. For example, a prompt might look like this. Review the following Azure security assessment findings. We'll group them by business risk, operational impact, implementation, effort, and recommended priority. That's incredibly useful. But notice what AI is doing. It's accelerating analysis, right? It's not making that final decision. A recommendation that's critical in one organization might be much less important in another. AI doesn't understand organizational context the way experienced consultants do. AI can help us process information faster. Consultants help determine what actually matters. And that's one of the reasons I believe AI is becoming such a powerful tool in consulting. Not because it's going to replace that expertise, because it's going to amplify that expertise. At this point in the journey, what are we actually trying to achieve? It's not perfect security. Perfect security does not exist. Trying to create a secure, resilient, manageable environment. We want stronger identity controls. We want visibility. We want governance, right? And monitoring, and we want that sort of threat detection. We need those clear operational processes. Most importantly, we want confidence. The confidence that the organization can continue growing while managing risk responsibly. That is what successful security architecture delivers. Not fear, confidence. So far, we've completed discovery. We've designed our landing zone. We've established identity architecture. We've built networking foundations. And now we've got our security strategy. The next challenge is one many organizations will find daunting. Migration. How do we move workloads into Azure safely? Which workload should move first? And which should actually stay where they are? Right? We need to look at risks and how we evaluate those. And how do consultants approach migration planning without disrupting the business? That is exactly what we're going to explore in episode 6. Right, we'll walk through migration strategy, prioritization, risk assessment, and how AI can assist consultants with planning complex migration programs. If you found this episode valuable, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications as well so you don't miss episode 6 of the Azure Consultant Playbook AI Edition. If you know someone responsible for Azure security or cloud architecture or even digital transformation, make sure you share this with them. And before you go, answer this question in the comments. Genuinely love to hear your experiences. Thanks for watching, and remember, security isn't about building walls around the business. It's about creating the confidence to move forward safely.